A glimpse of the unseen. James Thornton, a wealthy businessman, led a life that many envied. He had risen from humble beginnings, his only family a distant memory he rarely thought about, and was now the CEO of a successful tech company. His life was filled with luxury, from lavish parties to exquisite dinners with people of influence. Yet, despite everything, there was a gnawing emptiness within him, a feeling he couldn't quite explain. One breezy autumn day, James found himself strolling along a street in his hometown. He'd come for a business conference and thought it might be refreshing to walk through his old neighborhood. The air felt different here. It was filled with memories he had long buried. Passing by the local park, he noticed a group of children playing by the swings. They were laughing, calling each other's names, and the warmth in their voices stirred something deep within him. As he looked closer, his heart skipped a beat. The children, a boy with dark, wavy hair, a girl with striking green eyes, and two little ones who looked like younger versions of the older kids, all bore an uncanny resemblance to him. Shock flooded his senses as he took in the familiar features, as if he were staring at his own reflection through time. In an instant, memories of his youth came rushing back. He thought of his mother, who had always told him that family bonds were unbreakable. But could these children truly be his? He watched as they played, oblivious to his presence, their laughter filling the chilly afternoon air. His mind raced with questions. How could this be? Was this some strange coincidence, or was there a connection he had overlooked? James couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to know more about them. Taking a deep breath, he approached the group with a polite smile. The children noticed him, their laughter fading into curiosity as they regarded him. The oldest, the boy with the dark, wavy hair, looked at James with a suspicious gaze. "Hello there," James greeted, his voice gentle. The boy stood tall, protectively shielding the younger children. "Who are you?" he asked boldly, his tone cautious yet firm. James chuckled lightly, disarmed by the boy's strength. "My name is James. I just wanted to say hello. I used to live around here a long time ago," he explained, unsure of how to approach the topic on his mind. "What's your name?" The boy hesitated before replying. "I'm Ethan. These are my siblings, Bella, Luke, and Lily." He gestured to the others with a brief nod. "We're waiting for our mom. She works a lot." A pang of empathy hit James as he absorbed Ethan's words. He knew what it was like to wait for a mother who worked tirelessly to provide. Observing them closely, he noticed the slightly worn clothes, the shoes that seemed a size too small. These were children who had known hardship, children who, somehow, seemed tied to his own past. In that moment, the youngest of the group, Lily, a tiny girl with dark hair that fell in gentle waves around her face, tugged at his sleeve. "Are you a prince?" she asked innocently, her eyes wide with wonder. James laughed softly, charmed by her innocence. "Not quite, but I guess you could say I have a lot of responsibilities," he replied. Their mother, a slender woman with tired eyes but a warm smile, approached from the distance, her gaze narrowing as she noticed James with her children. She looked familiar to him, though he couldn't place why. She pulled her children close, giving James a wary look. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice tinged with caution. James fumbled for words, the shock of the encounter overwhelming him. I was just passing by and wanted to say hello," he managed, feeling oddly vulnerable. "Your children are beautiful. They remind me of someone." Her expression softened slightly, but a hint of guardedness remained. "Thank you," she said curtly, gathering her children. "Come on, kids." As they walked away, James felt a strange, hollow ache. He didn't even know her name, but the familiar features of the children haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that these kids were connected to him in a way that he didn't yet understand. Determined, James made a decision. He would find out more, no matter what it took. This encounter had opened a door to a past he thought was closed. It was time to uncover the secrets of his own life. even if it meant confronting parts of himself he'd left behind. Shadows of the past. James Thornton could hardly sleep that night. The faces of those children haunted him, especially the unmistakable likeness they bore to himself. It was as if he had seen fragments of his own youth reflected in their wide eyes and soft, familiar expressions. Each time he closed his eyes, he could picture the way Ethan had stood tall, protecting his siblings and the little girl's innocent question, "Are you a prince?" As morning dawned, James knew he had to pursue answers. He dressed quickly and left his upscale hotel room with a resolve he hadn't felt in years. He realized that he couldn't let go of this feeling without understanding it. He needed to know why he felt such an undeniable connection with those children. To begin, he decided to visit the local library. He thought that perhaps the records there could provide him with some information about the family. The library was a place he hadn't set foot in for years, not since he was a young man searching for inspiration to fuel his ambitions. Now, however, he found himself searching for something entirely different, a glimpse into his past. The library smelled of old paper and memories. He approached the front desk, where an older librarian with silver hair and a gentle smile greeted him. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How can I help you?" James hesitated, realizing how strange his request might sound. "I'm looking for information on local families. Specifically, I'd like to know if there are any records or archives on a family that might be connected to myself." The librarian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Are you researching family history?" she asked kindly. James nodded, hoping she wouldn't press him for too many details. "Yes, something like that." After a moment's thought, she gestured for him to follow her to a back room filled with bound volumes and archived newspapers. "We keep quite a few family records here. Old newspaper clippings, community announcements, that sort of thing. You might find something useful." James thanked her and dove into the archives, his fingers scanning through countless pages, his mind racing with possibilities. Hours passed as he sifted through records and announcements, looking for anything that might connect him to the family he'd met the previous day. But with each page he turned, frustration grew. There was nothing. No familiar names, no faces he recognized, no hint of connection. Finally, just as he was about to give up, he came across a faded clipping from over a decade ago. The headline caught his attention immediately. "Local woman raises children against all odds." Beneath the title was a photo of a young woman with a bright, hopeful smile, cradling a small child in her arms. Beside her stood a toddler with big, dark eyes that reminded James of Ethan. His pulse quickened. This woman looked almost identical to the one he'd seen at the park. Could this be her? The article described her struggles as a single mother, determined to provide for her children despite financial hardships. But what struck James the most was a sentence buried near the end of the article. "The children bear a remarkable resemblance to a well-known local businessman who left the area several years ago." His heart skipped a beat. There was only one local businessman he could think of who had left the area around that time. Himself. His mind spun with questions, memories flooding back. He thought of a time years ago when he'd been involved with a woman named Sarah. Their relationship had been brief but intense, filled with a passion he hadn't felt since. They had ended things quickly, with his ambitious drive to leave and start his career overtaking any potential future together. Could it be possible? Had they? James felt a mixture of guilt, confusion, and awe. If Sarah was indeed the woman in the article, and if those were their children, he had unknowingly left behind not just a relationship but a family. He wasn't sure whether to feel regret or disbelief. He knew only that he needed to find her, to hear her side of the story, to see if these suspicions were true. Armed with the address listed in the article, James made his way across town to a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The houses here were small but well kept, and he could sense a tight-knit community as he walked down the street. He finally reached the address from the article. A quaint, weathered home with a garden of colorful flowers out front. Just as he was about to knock, the door swung open, and he found himself face to face with Sarah. Her expression shifted from surprise to recognition, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of him standing there on her porch. She looked older than he remembered, but just as beautiful. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, a resilience he hadn't seen before. "James," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. What are you doing here?" He struggled for words, his throat dry. I saw the kids yesterday. At the park. They looked just like me, Sarah." I couldn't ignore it. A flicker of pain crossed her face, but she held his gaze. "I didn't think you'd ever come back," she replied, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. "I thought you'd forgotten about this place. About us." James felt a pang of regret as he looked at her, realizing that his decision to leave had cost her so much. "I didn't know," he admitted, his voice choked with emotion. If I had known, things would have been different." She studied him for a moment, then sighed, crossing her arms over her chest. "James, the past can't be changed. I've raised these kids alone, and they are everything to me. They'd grown up without you. What can you do now that could change any of that?" The truth of her words stung, but he wasn't ready to give up. "Maybe I can't change the past," he replied, his voice steadier. "But I want to be part of their lives now, if you'll let me. I want to get to know them, to support you and them however I can." Sarah hesitated, her eyes softening slightly. "It's not that simple, James. They don't know you. They only know the life we've had here, just the five of us. You can't just walk in and expect them to welcome you with open arms." James nodded, understanding the enormity of what he was asking. "I know it will take time. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Please, Sarah, give me a chance to make this right." She looked away, considering his words. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Come to the park tomorrow. I'll bring them there. We'll see how it goes, but don't expect too much." Relief flooded through him, and he nodded, a glimmer of hope sparking in his heart. "Thank you, Sarah. I won't let you down." As he left her house, he felt a strange mixture of emotions: guilt, hope, fear, and excitement. The thought of meeting his children formally, of learning about their lives and personalities, thrilled him. But he also knew he had a lot to prove. His decision to leave years ago had been his alone, and now he would have to bear the consequences. A tentative reunion. The next afternoon, James found himself at the park again, the place where he had first seen the 4 children who had thrown his life into turmoil. He stood near the same swings, his gaze drifting over the landscape, watching families with their children laughing and playing. It struck him how different his life had become overnight, shifting from the world of boardrooms and business deals to one centered on a family he hadn't known he had. After a few minutes, he spotted Sarah walking toward him, her shoulders slightly hunched, her expression guarded. Beside her, the children followed closely, looking around with curiosity and excitement. Ethan, the oldest, walked with the same protective stance as the day before, his eyes narrowed as he observed the stranger who had appeared in their lives. Bella, the second oldest, wore an expression of quiet interest, while the twins, Luke and Lily, exchanged whispers and giggles, seemingly less aware of the gravity of the moment. When they reached James, Sarah paused, taking a deep breath. She gave him a small, tentative smile. "Kids, this is James. He's a friend of mine," she introduced, her tone steady but cautious. James felt a pang of disappointment at the word friend, but he understood why she'd chosen it. The children didn't know who he was. They had grown up without him. This meeting had to be gentle, careful for their sake. Ethan, still wary, spoke first. "You were the man from yesterday, right?" he asked, his voice slightly defiant. "Yes, I was," James replied, meeting Ethan's gaze with a calm smile. "It's nice to see you again, Ethan." He wanted to reach out, to say more, but he held back, unsure of how the children would react. Bella stepped forward, tilting her head as she studied James with intense curiosity. "You look Kind of like us, she said quietly, her eyes searching his face. James's heart skipped a beat. He could see her mind turning, trying to piece together the clues. You know, Bella, he replied softly. Sometimes we meet people who remind us of ourselves, even if we don't know why at first. The youngest, Lily, took a few hesitant steps toward him. She looked up at him, her large, curious eyes reflecting a mix of innocence and wonder. Are you really a prince? She asked again, her voice so earnest it brought a smile to his face. James knelt down to her level, his expression softening. I wish I could say I was, he chuckled. But I'm just someone who hopes to get to know you and your family a little better. Lily giggled, the sound light and pure, and it eased the tension in James's heart. Luke, her twin, nudged her playfully, whispering something into her ear that made her burst into laughter. The twins' laughter seemed to thaw the moment, breaking the initial tension that had hung in the air. Sarah took a step forward, placing a gentle hand on Ethan's shoulder. Why don't we go sit down? She suggested, guiding the children over to a nearby bench. James joined them, feeling a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. He had faced countless high-stakes meetings in his life, but nothing felt as momentous as sitting with these 4 children, his children. His gaze drifted over their faces, noting the unique qualities of each. Ethan's determined jaw, Bella's soft, inquisitive eyes, and the twins' contagious joy. Do you have kids, too? Bella asked suddenly, her gaze meeting his with open curiosity. James hesitated, then shook his head. No, I don't. You're the only ones I've ever met who made me think about what it might be like to be part of a family, he replied, choosing his words carefully. Ethan raised an eyebrow. So, you don't have kids, but you want to be part of our family. Why would you want that? James swallowed, his mind racing for an answer. I think sometimes, Ethan, life gives us second chances, and sometimes we don't realize what we're missing until it's right in front of us. I'd like to spend time with you all if that's okay with you. The children exchanged glances, processing his words. Bella looked at Sarah, who gave her an encouraging nod, though her own expression remained cautious. Bella seemed to gather courage from this and turned back to James with a shy smile. Maybe you could tell us about where you're from, she suggested, clearly interested in learning more about this man who had appeared so suddenly. Relieved to have an opening, James nodded. I'd love to. Well, I actually grew up around here, just like you, he began, his mind flashing back to his childhood. I wasn't always, wealthy. I had to work hard to build my business. I left this town a long time ago to chase my dreams, and I worked day and night to make them happen. Do you have a lot of money? Luke interrupted, his eyes wide with curiosity. James chuckled, nodding. Yes, I do. But you know, Luke, money isn't everything. I've realized that more in the last day than I ever did before. Lily looked up at him, her expression serious. My mommy says family is more important than money. James's heart twisted at her words. Your mommy is very wise, he replied, glancing at Sarah, who met his gaze with a bittersweet smile. The children continued asking questions, their curiosity softening the initial tension, but Ethan remained quiet, his gaze sharp and watchful. After a while, Sarah suggested they all go for ice cream. The kids cheered, and for the first time, James saw Ethan's face light up, if only briefly. As they walked to the ice cream stand, James felt a warmth growing inside him, a sense of connection he hadn't felt before. The children's excitement was contagious, and he found himself laughing along with them as they debated which flavors to choose. As they enjoyed their ice cream, a moment of quiet settled between bites. James took a deep breath, gathering his courage. You know, kids, I'd really like to see you again, if that's okay with you. Bella looked at Sarah, who gave her an encouraging nod. Maybe we can come back here next week, Bella suggested, her voice filled with a cautious hope. James's heart lifted. I would love that, he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. I'll be here, waiting for you. Ethan finally spoke, his tone thoughtful. "We don't know you yet, but maybe you could tell us more next time." James nodded, touched by Ethan's willingness to give him a chance. "I'd be honored to," he replied sincerely. As the sun began to set, James watched as Sarah gathered the children to leave. They waved goodbye, and he felt a tug in his heart as they walked away. He had come to the park with hope, but he left with something deeper, a newfound sense of responsibility and a fierce determination to prove himself to these children. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about his wealth, his business, or his status. All he could think about was the laughter of his children, their innocent questions, and the way they had looked at him with both curiosity and cautious trust. He had a chance to be part of their lives, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. As he watched them disappear into the distance, James knew he had a long journey ahead. He had to earn their trust, to show them that he was willing to be there for them in ways he hadn't before. And maybe, just maybe, he could be the father they deserved. Steps toward family. Over the following week, James found himself nervously anticipating the next meeting with his children. He had thought about little else since that day at the park. He had relived every moment, every question, and every smile, hoping that this next meeting would bring them closer to accepting him as more than just a stranger. On the day of their planned reunion, James arrived at the park early. The air was crisp, carrying the first hints of winter, and he wrapped his coat tightly around himself, trying to calm his nerves. When he finally saw them approaching, Sarah walking beside the children as they bounded ahead, his heart felt full with a strange mixture of hope and apprehension. "Hey, everyone," he greeted, waving as the kids ran up to him. Ethan, always the cautious one, hung back slightly, while Bella gave him a tentative smile. The twins, Luke and Lily, were their usual giggly selves, and he could see that they had grown more comfortable around him, if only a little. "Hi, James." Bella greeted him, her tone warmer than before. "We're here early too." James knelt down, smiling at her and the others. "I'm really glad you came back. I was looking forward to today." They all sat down on a nearby bench, and James pulled out a small photo album from his bag. "I thought, maybe I could show you some pictures from when I was younger," he offered, holding the album out for them to see. Ethan looked skeptical but curious, and Bella eagerly opened the album, flipping through pictures of a young James. There were photos of him as a boy playing baseball, family gatherings, and even a few from his high school graduation. The children peered over each page, laughing and asking questions. Luke pointed at a picture of James wearing an oversized baseball uniform. "Did you play sports too?" James chuckled, nodding. "I did, back in the day. I played baseball, though I wasn't very good at it. My coach always said I spent too much time daydreaming instead of paying attention to the game." Lily giggled, her eyes bright. "You look funny in that picture." They continued flipping through the album, and for the first time, James felt like he was truly connecting with them. Bella seemed especially intrigued, often glancing up at him with a thoughtful expression, as if she were beginning to piece together an idea of who he really was. As they neared the end of the album, Ethan looked up, his expression serious. "Why did you leave here? If you grew up here, why did you go away?" James paused, taking a deep breath. This was a question he had known was coming, but answering it wasn't easy. "I left because I wanted to build something for myself," he began slowly, searching for the right words. "I thought that the only way to be successful was to leave, to go somewhere new, and in the process, I lost touch with people who mattered to me." Ethan's gaze softened slightly, though there was still a guardedness there. "So, you didn't have to go." James hesitated, feeling the weight of his son's words. "Maybe not," he admitted, his voice quiet. "Looking back, I see that now. But sometimes people make choices that they don't fully understand until it's too late." The children fell silent, digesting his words, and he hoped that they could sense the sincerity behind them. Sarah, who had been standing nearby, approached them with a gentle smile. breaking the tension. "How about we take a walk?" she suggested, looking from James to the children. They all agreed, and soon they were strolling along the park path, the children running ahead while James and Sarah followed at a slower pace. James stole a glance at Sarah, unsure if she had heard what he had said to Ethan. Her expression was thoughtful, though she didn't bring up the conversation. Instead, she sighed, glancing up at the sky. "They're warming up to you," she remarked, a small smile playing on her lips. "I can see it. They're curious about you, James, and that's a start." James nodded, grateful for her words. "I hope I can earn their trust. They deserve more than just words." Sarah stopped walking, turning to face him. Her eyes were serious, filled with the quiet strength he had always admired. "Trust doesn't come easily, James," she said gently. "You left a long time ago, and they've grown up without knowing you. I had to be their only parent, and it hasn't been easy. But they're good kids, and they're willing to give you a chance." He took her words to heart, feeling both hopeful and humbled. "Thank you, Sarah. I know it's not easy for you either. I'm truly grateful that you're letting me into their lives, even after all this time." She gave a slight nod, her expression softening. "It's not about me, James. It's about them. They deserve to know who you are, even if it takes time for them to understand everything." Their conversation was interrupted by Bella's excited shout. She had discovered a small wooded area near the edge of the park and was beckoning everyone over. "Come on, you have to see this," she called, her eyes shining with excitement. The entire group followed her to the woods, where the children immediately began exploring. They stumbled upon a makeshift fort built from fallen branches and leaves, clearly a place where local kids had played before. The twins climbed onto the branches, pretending to be explorers, while Ethan and Bella stood back, watching with amused smiles. James joined them, feeling a wave of nostalgia as he watched the children play. He couldn't remember the last time he had let himself relax, to simply enjoy a moment like this without thinking about work or obligations. But here, with his children, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't felt in years. At one point, Ethan turned to him, a question in his eyes. "Do you think you'll stay around, or are you going to leave again?" The question caught James off guard, and he took a moment to respond, his gaze meeting Ethan's. "I don't want to leave," he said earnestly. "I want to be here, for you and your sisters and brother. I know I missed out on a lot, but if you'll let me, I'd like to make up for that." Ethan nodded slowly, seeming to weigh his words. He looked at his younger siblings, who were playing happily, then back at James. "We'll see," he replied, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. James felt a surge of relief, knowing that Ethan's guarded approval was a huge step forward. For the rest of the afternoon, they laughed, shared stories, and explored the small wooded area together. It was as if, for a few hours, they were a real family, and James could see a future with them, a chance to be the father they had never known. When it was time to say goodbye, the children hugged him, even Ethan, who seemed to surprise himself by doing so. They promised to meet again, and James watched them walk away with Sarah, a sense of fulfillment warming his heart. As he walked back to his hotel, he thought of the long road ahead, the trust he still had to earn, and the relationships he had yet to build. But for the first time in years, he felt that his life was filled with purpose, no longer just defined by wealth or success, but by the connections he was finally making with the family he had never known. Building bridges and facing resistance. The following weeks were a whirlwind of small victories and subtle challenges as James found himself increasingly immersed in the lives of his children. He had begun arranging weekly outings with them, visits to museums, small trips to the zoo, and picnics at the park. He wanted to show them parts of life that he had once enjoyed and to discover their unique personalities in the process. Despite his efforts, James sensed that his journey toward truly being part of their lives was just beginning. Each child responded to him in different ways, and while some moments felt like progress, Others revealed the complexities of the relationships he was trying to build. Ethan, as always, was the most guarded. He attended each outing with a look of quiet suspicion, always watching James carefully. Although they shared moments of connection, like their mutual love for science documentaries or a shared sense of adventure, Ethan remained distant, as if he was constantly waiting for James to make a mistake. James knew that the boy's trust would take time, if he ever truly earned it. Bella, on the other hand, was curious but cautious. She would ask James questions about his childhood, his favorite hobbies, and even his fears. She listened carefully to his answers, always with a look of deep contemplation on her face. But whenever he tried to ask her personal questions, she would close up, offering only brief responses. James understood that she was testing him, trying to gauge whether he was truly sincere in his desire to know her and be a part of her life. The twins, Luke and Lily, were the most open, greeting him with hugs and laughter every time they met. They asked James endless questions, often pulling him into their games and silly antics. For them, James was someone new and exciting, someone who brought a spark of joy into their days. But even with them, James sensed a hidden fragility, a childlike innocence that might break if he disappointed them. One Friday evening, James decided to take the children to a planetarium show. He had rented a small bus to drive them all together, feeling a surge of pride as they piled into the seats around him, chatting and laughing. Sarah, who had accompanied them, sat beside him in the front, her gaze softening as she watched the children's excitement. As they settled in at the planetarium, James noticed Ethan's growing interest. The boy was completely absorbed in the presentation about the stars and planets, his face lighting up with each new discovery. James leaned over and whispered, "Did you know I wanted to be an astronaut when I was your age?" Ethan's eyes widened, but he quickly masked his interest. "Really?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent. James nodded. "I even built a small telescope with my dad. It didn't work very well, but I thought it was amazing." For a moment, Ethan looked at him with genuine curiosity. "Did you ever go to space?" he asked, half joking. James laughed softly. "No, I didn't, but I learned that there are other ways to reach for the stars. Life can take you to amazing places, even if it's not where you originally planned." Ethan gave a small, thoughtful nod, his skepticism softening just a bit. It was one of the few moments when James felt that he was starting to reach his oldest son, and it filled him with hope. After the show, they gathered outside under the clear night sky. James pointed out constellations to the twins, while Bella and Ethan looked on, both quietly observing him with a mix of interest and caution. He saw in their expressions the unspoken questions they held, questions about where he fit into their lives, if he was going to stay, and if he would someday leave again. When they finally returned home, Sarah invited James inside for a cup of tea, sensing he wasn't quite ready to say goodbye. They sat at the kitchen table as the children played quietly in the next room, and James took a moment to gather his thoughts. "They're amazing kids, Sarah," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I can see that you've done such a good job raising them. I just hope that I can be the kind of person they can rely on." Sarah sighed, stirring her tea as she glanced toward the room where the children were playing. "It hasn't been easy, James," she replied, her tone soft but firm. "There were days when I didn't know if I could do it alone, but I had to. They needed someone to be there for them, every day, and that's what I tried to be." Her words struck him with a pang of guilt. He couldn't help but think of all the moments he had missed, the birthdays, the school plays, the scraped knees, and the bedtime stories. He hadn't been there for any of it, and while he couldn't change the past, he felt a renewed determination to make up for it in whatever way he could. "I want to be here now," he said earnestly. "I know it's late, and I know I have a lot to prove, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. "Then be consistent, James," she replied. "They need to know that you're going to be there, not just for the fun days, but for everything." the good and the bad. He nodded, understanding the depth of her words. Being a father was more than just showing up for a few outings. It was about being present, every day, in ways that mattered. It meant facing challenges, confronting their fears, and standing by them even when things got tough. A sudden crash from the other room startled them, and they rushed in to find Lily standing in the middle of a scattered pile of toys, her face scrunched up in frustration. "I was trying to build a tower," she explained, her voice wavering as she looked at the mess. "But it keeps falling down." James knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Building a tower isn't easy, but it takes practice. How about I help you?" he suggested. Lily's face brightened, and together they rebuilt the tower, block by block. Ethan, Bella, and Luke joined in, each contributing to the structure in their own way. By the time the tower was complete, they were all laughing, feeling the shared sense of accomplishment. Later that night, as he prepared to leave, Ethan approached him, his expression a mix of curiosity and lingering doubt. "Will we see you next week?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. James met his gaze with a determined smile. "You bet," he replied, ruffling Ethan's hair. "I'll be here. I promise." As he stepped out of the house, he felt the weight of that promise settle within him. He knew he was asking the children to take a leap of faith, to trust that he wouldn't let them down. It was a responsibility that humbled him, but it was one he was determined to fulfill. Driving back to his hotel, he realized how much his life had changed since that day at the park. He was no longer the wealthy man who drifted through life without attachments. He was now a father, and for the first time, he understood that this role was more valuable than any title or fortune he had ever achieved. A test of commitment. Over the next few months, James kept his promise to the children, showing up every week without fail. As winter settled in, their weekly outings turned into cozy indoor activities, movie nights, baking sessions, and even family game nights where laughter echoed through Sarah's small home. Each gathering seemed to bridge the emotional gap between them, and slowly, the children's guardedness began to fade. James's heart warmed each time they called him Dad, a word he had longed to hear since that first day he saw them at the park. Bella would often sit close to him during movie nights, her head resting on his shoulder, while the twins, Luke and Lily, fought over who would hold his hand during their walks. Even Ethan, the most skeptical of them all, had begun to let his defenses down. He would occasionally share small victories from school or ask James for advice on his science projects, a clear sign that his oldest son was beginning to trust him. But just as James felt his life finally falling into place, he encountered a challenge that tested his newfound resolve. One cold January afternoon, James was busy preparing for another outing with the children when he received an unexpected call from his office. He hadn't told his business associates much about his personal life, keeping his new role as a father private, but they had noticed his reduced availability. "Mr. Thornton, we've been trying to reach you," his assistant, Linda, said with a hint of urgency in her voice. "The shareholders are concerned. They want you at the upcoming board meeting in New York. They're demanding answers, and some are even questioning your commitment to the company." James felt a wave of frustration. This was a critical meeting that would decide the company's direction for the year, and he knew missing it could jeopardize everything he'd built. But the meeting clashed with an important weekend he had planned with the children, a winter festival in the city that they had been eagerly anticipating for weeks. Torn between his past life and his current commitments, James hesitated. For so long, his identity had been rooted in his success as a businessman. Now, however, he found himself weighing his choices differently, realizing that his priorities had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. He called Sarah, explaining the situation and hoping she might offer a solution. "You have to make the decision, James," Sarah replied gently. "I can't tell you what to choose, but remember that the children have started to count on you. They've begun to trust you, and missing this weekend might hurt them more than you think." Her words echoed in his mind long after he hung up. As he paced his hotel room, He thought of the laughter, the small hands that held his, and the innocent trust the children had begun to place in him. He knew that this decision went far beyond a single weekend. It was about showing them that they could rely on him, that he would put them first, even when it was difficult. Taking a deep breath, he called Linda back. "Tell the board that I won't be able to attend," he said firmly, feeling a sense of peace as he made his choice. "I'll submit my input remotely, but I have a commitment here that I can't break." The next morning, he arrived at Sarah's house bright and early, bundled up against the winter chill. The children greeted him with squeals of excitement, their eyes shining with anticipation for the festival. They chattered excitedly about the events they wanted to see, the ice sculptures, the sleigh rides, and the hot chocolate stands. As they made their way to the festival, James marveled at how much his life had changed. He was no longer the distant businessman. He was their father, a title he cherished more than he had ever imagined. Watching the children's faces light up as they took in the festive sights, he felt that he had finally found a purpose beyond himself, beyond his ambitions. Ethan, however, remained reserved, watching James quietly from a distance. At one point, as they stopped for hot chocolate, he approached James, his face serious. "Dad," he began hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" James knelt down, meeting his son's gaze. "Of course, Ethan. You can ask me anything." Ethan took a deep breath. "Are you going to stay? I mean, for real. Not just for now, but forever." The question hit James hard, and he saw the vulnerability behind Ethan's usually guarded expression. He realized that for Ethan, the fear of abandonment lingered, and only time could reassure him. James placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice steady. "Yes, Ethan, I'm here to stay. I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Ethan looked away, blinking rapidly, and gave a small nod. It wasn't a complete surrender of his trust, but it was a step, a small bridge between them that James cherished deeply. The rest of the day passed in a blur of laughter and joy. They watched the ice sculptors at work, cheering as massive blocks of ice transformed into animals and castles. The twins squealed with excitement as they rode in a horse-drawn sleigh, and Bella linked her arm through James as they admired the snow-covered park. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the festival, James felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He knew that he had made the right choice, that being with his children, prioritizing them over his work, had given his life a depth and meaning he had never known before. But later that evening, as they returned to Sarah's house, reality intruded once again. James received an email from his company's board of directors, expressing their disappointment and suggesting he consider stepping back if his focus was no longer on the business. Sarah noticed his troubled expression and asked, "Is everything okay?" James sighed, feeling the weight of his decisions. "The board is unhappy. They're saying I might need to step down if I can't commit fully to the company. It's complicated." She studied him for a moment, her gaze filled with understanding. "You've built a life around that company, James, but you've also started to build something here, with the kids, with us. Only you can decide what's worth holding on to." Her words stayed with him long after he left, filling his mind as he drove through the quiet streets. He knew he could return to his old life, preserving his success and reputation. But deep down, he understood that no amount of success could replace the love he felt for his children, the joy of being part of their lives. In the weeks that followed, James made the decision to step down as CEO. He arranged for new leadership and gradually shifted his responsibilities, preparing to hand over control to someone he trusted. It was a difficult transition, one filled with moments of doubt, but each time he spent a day with his children, he felt reaffirmed in his choice. One day, as he helped the twins build a snowman in the front yard, he noticed Ethan standing nearby, watching him. For a moment, James worried that his son was still questioning his commitment, but Ethan surprised him. "I believe you now," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you're here to stay." James felt his heart swell with emotion, and he smiled, pulling Ethan into a hug. "Thank you, Ethan," he replied, his voice thick with gratitude. "That means everything to me." That night, after he had tucked the children into bed, he sat with Sarah in the living room, the quiet warmth of the house wrapping around them. "You're really here now, aren't you?" Sarah asked, her voice soft but steady. He nodded, reaching for her hand. "Yes, I am, and I'm not going anywhere." As they sat together, James knew he had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life. Not success or wealth, but a family, a place where he belonged. And as he held Sarah's hand, surrounded by the peaceful silence of their home, he felt a sense of contentment and fulfillment that no boardroom or business deal could ever offer.